Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Dangerous criminals live among us, and we often don't even notice them because they look like ordinary people. Quiet, polite, educated, family-oriented, and holding respectable jobs. They go to great lengths to disguise themselves as normal, law-abiding citizens. Even when the police investigate the crimes they commit, the perpetrators often don't even appear on the list of suspects. Moreover, such individuals are skilled manipulators, which allows them to lure their victims into traps and later shift the blame onto someone else. The case of Joanna Yates in 2010 shocked the entire United Kingdom, becoming one of the most high-profile and widely discussed cases in the country. The young woman disappeared without a trace from her rented apartment just before Christmas, and a week later, the truth shocked even the most experienced detectives. Joanna Claire Yates was born on April 19, 1985, in Hampshire, England. She was the youngest of two children in the family of David and Teresa Yates. Joanna grew up with her older brother Christian in a wealthy family where both parents held senior management positions and earned good salaries. They never skimped on their children and always tried to provide them with the best education. Joanna was very intelligent, ambitious, and creative. She excelled in her studies and attended a prestigious private school before enrolling at the University of Essex, where she chose to study landscape design. Joanna had dreamed of working in this field since childhood because she always had an eye for beauty and knew how to create it. Soon after earning her degree, Joanna was invited to work in her field at a large company where she was able to unleash her potential. She quickly established herself as a highly skilled professional and confidently advanced up the career ladder, eventually becoming the head of her department. In 2008, Joanna met a young man named Gregory Reardon, who worked as an engineer at the company Highland Edgar Driver. Gregory was just 2 years older than Joanna. They quickly hit it off, and their relationship became romantic. Within a year, they decided to move in together. The couple wasn't in a hurry to officially register their relationship. They were saving money for a wedding and a home, so they focused on their work and career ambitions. Therefore, when Joanna unexpectedly received a job offer in the fall of 2010 from the leading construction firm Building Design Partnership in Bristol, she gladly accepted it, and the couple began preparing to move. Gregory didn't change his job, but simply transferred to another branch of his company. In mid-October 2010, Joanna Yates and her boyfriend, Gregory Reardon, rented an apartment on the ground floor of a 2-story house in a quiet, cozy, and seemingly safe neighborhood in Bristol. The apartment had a private entrance and a garage for their car. The upper floor was occupied by the landlord, Christopher Jeffries, who owned the entire property. Another young couple, who had also recently moved in, rented the second ground floor unit. Gregory and Joanna quickly settled into their new home, making it as comfortable and inviting as possible. Their professional lives were thriving as well. Both fit in seamlessly at work, made new friends, and excelled in their roles. They were hardworking, ambitious, and personable, earning admiration from colleagues and acquaintances alike. The couple shared a deep love for each other and had ambitious plans for their future together. By mid-December, the two were preparing to celebrate their first Christmas in Bristol. They decorated their apartment, put up a Christmas tree, and bought gifts for friends and family. In the evenings, they would wrap presents, attaching cards with heartfelt messages and well wishes. On Friday, December 17, 2010, Gregory left for Sheffield to spend the weekend with his parents. Joanna decided to stay behind in their Bristol apartment. After work that evening, she planned to meet her friends and colleagues at a bar to celebrate the upcoming holidays and unwind. Over the weekend, she intended to finish wrapping gifts and promised Gregory she would prepare a romantic dinner for his return. The evening went as planned. Joanna spent a few hours at the bar with her friends, where they shared drinks, danced, and chatted about their Christmas plans. Around 8 p.m., Joanna said her goodbyes and headed home. On her way, she planned to stop by a store to pick up something to eat. Before driving off, she called Gregory to let him know she was on her way back and promised to text him before going to bed. No one saw her alive again after that. Gregory tried to contact Joanna throughout the weekend, but couldn't reach her. Worried, he attributed the lack of communication to occasional connectivity issues in their neighborhood. He returned home on Sunday evening and immediately noticed that something was wrong. First, the front door to their apartment was unlocked, which was highly unusual since Joanna always made sure to lock it. Second, Joanna herself was nowhere to be found, even though her purse, keys, and wallet were in their usual places. Third, their pet cat appeared extremely hungry, indicating that it hadn't been fed in days. Gregory tried calling Joanna again, but this time he heard her phone ringing in the living room. It was lying on the couch, untouched. Her car was still parked in the garage, and her winter coat and jacket were hanging by the entrance, alongside the boots she typically wore. The situation made no sense. Where could Joanna have gone without her outerwear and footwear, especially in the middle of winter when snow had been falling heavily all weekend? Reardon called several of Joanna's close friends and her parents. When he learned that none of them had been able to reach her all weekend either, he contacted the police. It was clear that Joanna hadn't been home for at least 2 days, so detectives immediately launched a search operation. The first step was to piece together a timeline of the day Joanna was last seen. Investigators discovered that she had been at work on Friday before heading to a bar with some colleagues. The bar was about a 20-minute drive from her apartment. At around 8:30 p.m., Joanna left for home, stopping at a nearby supermarket on the way. Security footage confirmed that she bought a pre-made pizza and 2 bottles of beer for dinner. Joanna arrived home around 9 p.m. and exchanged messages with a few friends, discussing an upcoming Christmas party. She put the pizza in the oven, got out a plate, and placed the beer on the table. One of the bottles was opened with only a couple of sips taken. Everything in the kitchen seemed to suggest she was about to sit down for dinner, but then it appeared as if she had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of forced entry into the apartment, nor were there any indications of a struggle, bloodstains, or evidence of an intruder. The police quickly ruled out robbery since her cash, bank cards, and other valuables were untouched. This led investigators to believe that Joanna might have been taken against her will by someone she knew. Someone she felt comfortable enough to let inside. Near the entrance, on a table next to Joanna's purse and keys, detectives found a receipt from the supermarket. The timestamp confirmed that she had purchased the pizza and beer around 8:30 p.m. However, while the beer remained untouched on the table, there were no traces of the pizza, no empty box in the trash or anywhere else in the apartment. Yet, the clean plate, utensils, and napkin she had prepared indicated she had been planning to eat. A massive search for Joanna began on Monday, December 20th. Despite their best efforts, the police had no leads and no clear direction for the investigation. If Joanna had been abducted for ransom, why hadn't there been any demands? Meanwhile, experienced investigators feared that she might no longer be alive. On Tuesday, Joanna's parents, brother, and boyfriend appeared on television, pleading with the public for help in finding her. They offered a reward of £10,000 for any credible information about her disappearance. A few days later, the reward was raised to £50,000. Despite these efforts, the investigation remained at a standstill, and the mystery of what had happened to Joanna deepened. Police carefully reviewed Joanna's route from the bar to her home, trying to determine if she had been followed. Surveillance footage from the supermarket where she stopped to make her purchases showed nothing suspicious. Street cameras also confirmed that no one was following her car, and she drove home alone without making any additional stops. At the same time, detectives began investigating Joanna's inner circle, looking for anyone who might have been involved in her disappearance. They found that she had no known conflicts, no enemies, and that everyone spoke highly of her. As is common in such cases, investigators first turned their attention to Gregory, Joanna's boyfriend, making him the primary suspect. While there was no indication of problems in their relationship or any motive for him to harm her, his alibi needed to be thoroughly checked and verified. After all, a trip to another city could have served as a convenient cover. It was soon confirmed that Reardon had worked a full day on Friday before driving straight to his parents' home. Along the way, he stopped at a gas station on the highway with a receipt time-stamped around 9 p.m., showing he was nearing Sheffield at that time. By 9:30 p.m., he was at his family's house, as confirmed by his relatives. He stayed there the entire weekend without leaving, which ruled out any possibility of him returning to Bristol undetected. Phone records showed that Gregory had made numerous attempts to contact Joanna over the weekend, placing dozens of calls and sending both text and voice messages, none of which received a response. With his alibi verified, Gregory was cleared of suspicion and removed from the list of potential suspects. On December 25, 2010, 8 days after Joanna's disappearance, a shocking discovery was made about 3 miles from her apartment. Early that morning, a couple walking their dogs through a remote, snow-covered area noticed one of their pets sniffing and digging at something in the snow. When they got closer, they were horrified to see a human leg protruding from the snowdrift. The couple immediately called the police to report the grisly find. Responding officers arrived quickly and uncovered the body of a young woman buried in the snow. Due to the freezing temperatures, the body was well preserved and showed little decomposition, despite having been there for several days. The victim was quickly identified as Joanna Yates, a confirmation made by her loved ones. A forensic examination revealed over 40 separate injuries on her body, including defensive wounds on her arms, which indicated that she had fought desperately to defend herself. Additionally, she had sustained broken ribs and a fractured nose, but the cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation. An autopsy revealed that there was no pizza in her stomach, suggesting she hadn't eaten any of it before the attack. Investigators concluded that the crime had occurred elsewhere, and her body had been transported to the wooded area to cover up evidence. The perpetrator attempted to conceal the remains by covering them with branches and leaves. However, a heavy snowstorm over the following days buried the body under a thick layer of snow, delaying its discovery. Despite the area being frequented by local joggers and dog walkers, it remained hidden for over a week. Joanna was found wearing the same clothes she had been seen in at the bar on the evening of her disappearance. However, her shirt was torn, her jeans were partially pulled down, and there were traces of bodily fluids on her clothing and abdomen, suggesting a personal motive for the attack. At home, Joanna often wore knitted socks instead of slippers, and one of those socks was still on her foot. The other was missing. It wasn't found in her apartment or near the body in the woods, leading detectives to speculate that the attacker might have taken it as a trophy, a common behavior among individuals with violent patterns or repeat offenders. With the discovery of Joanna's remains, the case was reclassified from a missing person investigation to a homicide. A large-scale operation was launched to identify and apprehend the perpetrator. Experienced forensic experts from the capital joined the case, which became one of the most high-profile crimes of the decade, widely covered by the media. Interviews with neighbors yielded no significant leads, as none of them reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious. On the ground floor of the same building where Joanna lived, another unit was rented by 32-year-old engineer Vincent Tabak and his fiancée, 28-year-old Tanya. On the night of Joanna's disappearance, Tanya was at a corporate holiday party that lasted late into the night, and Vincent picked her up around 2 a.m. Vincent claimed that he barely knew his neighbors, since they had only recently moved in. According to him, they would exchange greetings, but had never engaged in conversations. On that Friday, Vincent said he had been home sleeping and didn't leave the house until Tanya called him, asking for a ride home from her party. Across the street from Joanna's apartment, a house party was taking place that evening, with loud music and a significant number of guests. The revelers admitted that they had been drinking heavily and weren't aware of what might have been happening elsewhere in the neighborhood. However, around 9:30 p.m., a few people smoking on the balcony reported hearing a woman's scream. It was brief, quickly fading, and they dismissed it as nothing unusual. The investigation soon focused on 63-year-old Christopher Jeffries, Joanna and Gregory's landlord, who owned the building where they lived. Christopher was a retired school teacher who had stopped working after his retirement. He lived alone, and neighbors described him as quiet, intelligent, and eccentric. His unique style of dress, mannerisms, and long white hair had led some to view him as an odd figure, but most insisted he was harmless and incapable of committing such a heinous crime. When Jeffries was brought in for a second round of questioning, he appeared noticeably nervous, but agreed to answer all of the investigators' questions. He claimed that on the evening of Joanna's disappearance, he had gone to a local gym, which he frequented 3 times a week. According to his statement, he returned home around 9 p.m. and went to bed shortly after, hearing and seeing nothing unusual. Jeffries insisted he hadn't left his apartment until the next morning, but there was no one to corroborate his alibi. When pressed for more details, Jeffries suddenly remembered seeing 3 unfamiliar young men near the house as he returned from the gym. He claimed he had never seen them before and hadn't thought much of it at the time. However, he couldn't provide a description of the men, explaining that it was too dark to see them clearly. This sudden addition to his account seemed unconvincing and only heightened investigators' suspicions. Vincent Tabak, who rented the other ground-floor apartment with Tanya, told detectives that he had left the house twice that night, once to go to the store and later to pick Tanya up from her party. Vincent recalled that when he first left the house around 9 p.m., Jeffries' car was parked in the driveway. However, when he returned at 2 a.m. after picking Tanya up, the landlord's car was still in the driveway, but it was now facing the opposite direction. This suggested that Jeffries had gone out during the time he claimed to have been asleep. Gregory also recalled a conversation with Jeffries on the morning of December 17th. As Gregory was leaving for the weekend, he had informed Jeffries that he would be away and expressed concern about Joanna being alone in the apartment. This meant Jeffries knew that Joanna would be home alone, which raised further questions about his potential involvement. As the Yates case gained widespread media attention, news of law enforcement's interest in Christopher Jeffries leaked to the press even before his arrest. The revelation that a retired school teacher was a person of interest in the tragic death of a young woman caused a media frenzy. Tabloid outlets immediately began publishing a slew of unfounded rumors, alleging that Jeffries had behaved inappropriately during his teaching career and that he harbored troubling tendencies. None of these accusations had any basis, in fact, but the sensationalist reporting spiraled out of control. Christopher had maintained an impeccable reputation during his time as a teacher and was held in high regard by colleagues and students. However, the damaging articles began to shape public opinion against him. Within days, the situation escalated to the point where Jeffries could no longer leave his home without being confronted by reporters and angry locals, some of whom appeared ready to take matters into their own hands. On December 30th, Jeffries was arrested, and a search was conducted at his home. The retired teacher continued to assert his innocence, insisting he had no involvement in the crime. During the search, police found a pair of shoes with unusual brown stains, which were sent to the lab for analysis. A DNA sample was also collected from Jeffries to compare with the evidence found on Joanna's body and clothing. The analysis revealed that the stains on the shoes were not blood, but ordinary dirt. Shortly after, the DNA results confirmed that Jeffries' profile did not match the biological material recovered from the victim. With no evidence tying him to the crime, Jeffries was released from custody. However, the media harassment did not end, and the public's perception of him remained tainted despite his exoneration. With Jeffries ruled out as a suspect, detectives turned their attention to Vincent Tabak, who had previously been treated only as a witness. Tabak had no verified alibi for the night of Joanna's disappearance, and investigators began to notice discrepancies in his statements. Additionally, he had repeatedly tried to redirect suspicion toward Jeffries. When Tabak was brought in for questioning, detectives observed several faint, healing scratches on his neck, which he couldn't adequately explain. When asked about his neighbors, Tabak claimed he didn't know them well since they had only recently moved in. Police requested a DNA sample from Tabak, and he became visibly anxious, attempting to refuse. He explained his hesitation by stating that he had entered the neighboring apartment while it was unoccupied and may have inadvertently left traces of himself there. Despite his objections, police collected the sample, and lab results revealed a partial match to the biological material found on Joanna's body. The incomplete result was attributed to the sample on the victim being heavily degraded due to prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures and contamination. This discovery marked a turning point in the investigation, as Tabak was no longer just a witness. He became the primary suspect. Even with the incomplete DNA match, investigators had enough evidence to strongly suspect Vincent Tabak as the perpetrator. On January 11, 2011, He was arrested, and his apartment underwent a thorough search, which yielded unexpected results. Tabak had no prior criminal record and had never drawn the attention of law enforcement. He worked as a leading engineer and was engaged to be married. Those who knew him described him as quiet, polite, and well-mannered, without any apparent bad habits or peculiarities. During the search, detectives seized his laptop and decided to inspect his car. Although the interior of the vehicle smelled of cleaning agents, indicating an attempt to scrub it clean, he had missed a few critical spots. Experts found small drops of blood under the trunk's lining, later identified as belonging to Joanna Yates. In addition, they discovered tiny fibers matching those from Joanna's shirt. Even more disturbing was the forensic analysis of Tabak's electronic devices. Investigators uncovered a collection of graphic, violent material depicting extreme mistreatment of women. Tabak regularly searched for increasingly disturbing content of this nature online, and his computer contained files featuring inappropriate and unlawful content involving minors. It also became evident that Tabak had been closely following the Yates investigation, reading every news article about the case and keeping track of the detective's progress. He was aware of the media's harsh treatment of Christopher Jeffries and actively worked to amplify suspicion against his landlord. 2 days after his arrest, Tabak was formally charged with first-degree homicide based on the mounting evidence against him. Realizing that denial was futile, he admitted to causing Joanna's death and offered his version of events. According to Tabak, he was returning home from the store that evening when he saw Joanna through her window. She waved at him and invited him inside. Once in her apartment, Tabak claimed that Joanna made an intimate advance. He said he responded enthusiastically, but when Joanna changed her mind and began screaming, he panicked. Tabak alleged that he instinctively covered her mouth to silence her, worried that her screams would attract the neighbors. He claimed to have held his hand over her mouth for no more than 30 seconds, and when he let go, he realized she was no longer breathing. He described Joanna's death as an accident, explaining that he disposed of her body out of fear and panic. However, Tabak failed to account for the other injuries on Joanna's body or the blood found in the trunk of his car. Investigators dismissed his version of events, as the evidence suggested a more deliberate act. Tabak had not only taken Joanna's life, but also removed the pizza she had purchased, which was never recovered. According to investigators, a very different version of events unfolded that tragic evening. They theorized that Vincent Tabak had been watching Joanna Yates for some time and had developed an unhealthy obsession with her. He was aware that she would be alone for the weekend, having overheard part of a conversation between Gregory and Christopher that morning as he left his apartment. When Tabak saw Joanna return home that evening, he knocked on her door under false pretenses, convincing her to let him in. Once inside, he attacked her, recreating scenes from the violent material he frequently viewed. Based on the nature of her injuries, investigators concluded that Tabak had pinned Joanna down with his full weight, breaking her ribs, and subjected her to further harm, leaving her unable to escape or call for help. Tabak then brought his car to the entrance, loaded Joanna's body into the trunk, and drove to a secluded area. He concealed her remains under branches and leaves, which were later buried by snowfall, making it difficult for searchers to locate her. Adding to the shocking nature of the crime, Tabak took the pizza Joanna had prepared for dinner as he left the scene. Vincent Tabak's trial began in October 2011. Despite the severity of the evidence against him, Tabak chose to represent himself, declining legal counsel. He maintained his claim that Joanna's death was an accident, hoping for leniency in sentencing. On October 28, 2011, Tabak was found guilty of first-degree homicide and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving a minimum of 20 years. An additional year was later added to his sentence for possession of unlawful images and videos involving minors. As for Christopher Jeffries, he filed lawsuits against several media outlets for defamation, harassment, and damage to his reputation. He won all his cases, receiving substantial compensation and official apologies. Jeffries later wrote a memoir detailing the harassment and public scrutiny he endured during the investigation, shedding light on the personal toll of the ordeal. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.